The X there.
Oh, somebody, I wonder if that's the one Kim mentioned.
She might have moved it. I put
Barbara, were
one.
you?
I put
Were you-
one over here
Oh.
to mark it so they
Were you
didn't
standing
walk
here
off.
on an X, Barbara? We heard your name mentioned earlier today. And then just tell Barbara she.
Yes, and or,
It's just,
hey, Barbara, you're good to go whenever you're ready. Excuse me? You're good to go. Okay, no need, we won't ever start before executive time. And let's help here. Well, it would be helpful, right? Yeah.
Just online, but yeah, nice to see you. Yeah, nice to see you. Yeah, yeah. How was your drive over? That's good. Cool.
I couldn't remember if we actually promised.
We didn't. I'm available, but yeah, I know. Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The front desk is just the wide side.
Hi there. Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. Good.
Okay, see it.
Fill my water.
Yeah.
Hi, Dirk, you're gonna have questions about the sidewalk. Yeah, I don't know that it'll come, it may come up today. We talked about it not being sidewalk. We talked about it on AV and one of the things Dave Peters announced. If the city, the city demands what materials. We can't change the gravity.
You want to sit on it. Yeah, well, thank you.
As I recall, in the property, obviously, we don't do that.
If we
Yeah, it's funny.
So,
that's a working group. I want you to talk to the
I
case.
mean, I guess in terms of design, the city. Or liability.
Yeah.
I'm great. Yeah, I don't know.
That camera. Yeah.
Attention.
Yeah. Hello. How are you? Good. Hi, Dirk. Good, how are you? getting a run in this morning.
I did.
Good for you.
I know, it's nice.
We were out walking. My friend has this camera that's like this big.
Huge, yeah.
Oh, she has several of them. So we were out walking, but I mean, it's a good problem to have. Everything's so overgrown because of the rain.
Yeah.
But you couldn't see around the corner if there was an animal or anything.
Oh, yeah. I was noticing on the river trail along going to Oxbow, it's been trimmed.
Yeah.
It had been like the sides had been trimmed up, because remember there was those photos a while back, so that.
Yeah, no, this is just like you're pushing through the vegetation.
Yeah, yeah, over on that side. I didn't go over there. I was on the river
It's
trail.
constant.
It grows fast.
That's good, you know, it's good, but
Yeah.
there's been beer activity out there. And so you'd rather just-
I bet.
Hi,
how are you?
I bet. To see any distance.
So I don't think we have anybody here, so.
Okay.
Ben, are we live?
I think the YouTube stream, but start recording it.
I'm gonna give you a hi.
Hi.
Well, fair warning, I may be standing for quite a bit of work.
Having some back trouble.
Yeah.
Did something stupid yesterday, pancreas today. Doesn't take much.
No.
Sometimes I just tweak it and then I have
think what I
deep
did-
muscle pain for
Me too.
days.
And I slept horrible, like.
Yeah.
I haven't been working out as much as I used to, and now no, just because I'm busy, not because I want to. Right, but anytime I lift anymore, my back goes up every single time.
Okay.
No, so
You're
I
recording this?
No, it's like I do it. Yeah, it's like
Must have been a bad position.
I'm even in good positions. I like know what I'm doing, and it's still.
I should know better. I'm so limited.
I can bend over and pick something up. She'll give me a hand crossing a river crossing and she'll just kind of hold me
Get it.
back out. Just like giving me a hand crossing a river.
And it causes some tightness. I know stretching for like an hour, that helps, but.
I can't stretch for 24 hours.
No, I know.
And when you're not stretching, it goes back.
I'll be like, touch my toes, get in the fan, oh, and I think.
You need a hot bath.
Yeah, that's always
Right. Oh, yeah, that sounds good. Sounds really good.
hot springs. Go to the hot springs.
Medical massage.
Oh, that's good too. That's-
Any kind of massage.
Can I get that, please?
And our insurance cover that.
Yeah. Wish, yeah, mine doesn't.
I'll do that before we start. What's that?
We'll get started as soon as the recording is going. Oh, it's going. Okay, great. Welcome. Welcome to the August 16th City Council study session. My name is Barb Noseworthy, and we will go around with roll calls, starting with Councilor Youssef.
Melissa Youssef.
Jessica Buell.
Paul Forever.
Kim Baxter.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got a pretty full agenda today. We will cover future new business, Colorado communities for climate change. We've got a guest here, I believe. And then we'll finish the continued discussion. But as I start most study sessions and city council meetings, I will start with a land acknowledgement. This is my statement, which does not reflect the view of individual council members other than myself. For thousands of years, this region was home to numerous people, bands, tribes, and nations. Each had their distinct culture, artistic expression, and community mores. In particular, this region was the ancestral home of the Nuchu, Diné, Pueblo, Hopi, multiple Apache bands, and various other tribes and Latinx people who used and stewarded this land. I recognize that indigenous peoples were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands by the US government. It is important to recognize that the narrative of this region has mostly been told from the dominant perspective without recognition of those who came before us and who to this day continue to thrive, create, and connect with this land. Thank you for your respect in acknowledging this legacy. Great, welcome. Do we have any future new business that folks want to bring up? I do, if nobody else has anything. I just wanted to bring up, I think I sent a note out to you guys just at the last minute. There's been a fair bit of beer activity in the community, and I was wondering if it would make sense to speak with Jose and maybe have someone from Bear Smart or the Bear Working Group come and to give a brief update to the community during one of the city manager updates. There's been a fair bit, and this is a time where the bears are really active. They need to put on about 3 pounds a day, and they are in neighborhoods. So I wondered if you guys would support having Jose invite them to give a very brief update on.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's great.
First. Yeah, and the other thing I would be interested in is some of the answers to his questions.
Yes.
Brian's questions about our ordinances and how they work, and are there things that we might need to do? So staff maybe could also maybe give us some information on that.
Is there support for directing the city attorney
Yeah.
to look into those questions? Okay, so you have those, I sent those to you. Thank you for raising that. So what we would try to do is get those answers to his questions about commercial use of dumpsters and making certain that they're secure, and other questions.
Well, and maybe our ordinance needs some tweaks or something.
Yeah, it might need something. So we'll look to you, Dirk, for guidance. So we'll make certain, and we'll also chat. It would be really great if he could work us into the early September meeting, because the bears are really active right now. So nobody has anything else for new business? I guess we did it all 2 weeks ago.
We did a lot, we've been doing a lot.
Yes, that's
true.
And I think we have pretty full agendas, so I think it's kind of good news that we are not thinking we need to bring a bunch more things forward.
That's great. So Marty, do you want to come up? And we're early, but we're not gonna take a break. Yeah.
Marty
Yeah.
and Jacob Smith.
And Jacob Smith, thank you, from the Colorado Communities for Climate Action. And actually, Melissa, do you want to add a few words about it? Because aren't you the liaison to this group?
Yeah, I am. And really Marty has been attending for us. And it's great. I just met with Jacob and got a little background. He'll give you an update and answer any questions, but I'm fully supportive of, I'm very thankful that we're supporting this organization. Marty can add as well, but there's some really good work that they're doing at the state level. And it makes our voice much more impactful. So yeah, I'll leave it to these guys.
We'll have a seat.
Great, yeah,
and,
thanks for having me. Jacob has a slide deck, and I'm wondering, I haven't loaded onto the, so I can run the kiosk there. I was thinking of connecting on my laptop, but I think that's probably easier.
A lot of times they just take the keyboard and put it over here.
That's right.
And do you want to set the stage as well for us?
Yes,
From a
sorry.
sustainability point of
I'm
view?
always focused on the IT and technical side.
Not a worry.
That. So yes, actually it was a year ago tomorrow that City Council passed the resolution to join Colorado Communities for Climate Action.
That's funny, Chuck.
Yeah, it is, but we were talking about that coincidence. Yeah, so a year ago. And so CC4CA, Jacob Smith is the executive director, and will share more about the mission and impact of that organization. But we are a member community along with 38 other communities across Colorado. This is focused on climate advocacy and action, particularly at the state level for policy and legislation. So, and I also, from my standpoint, just want to say the information that CC4CA staff shares with its member organization, incredibly useful for keeping tabs on, grant opportunities, changes in federal and state policy that we have to stay up to speed on, and opportunities, information, learning, professional development. So it's a really great organization to be a part of. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jacob, and I will grab the keyboard and run the slide deck. So
Thank you.
Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, and Chief. It's great to be here. It's nice to meet you all in person. We got the basics out of the way. This deck, there's a lot of information in the deck that I know we only have 15 or now a little bit less. So some of that is there more as reference for you all, although I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about any of those details. But I'll skim through a bunch of those. I just wanted you to have some of that information. And
And the information that was sent in advance was also helpful.
great, okay.
We all
What am
did
I-
our pre-reads.
arrows?
Yeah, just you're up on the screen there.
There we go,
Just use
okay.
the arrows, yeah.
Perfect. So high level, what CC4CA is, coalition of local governments, 39 counties and municipalities across the state. We represent about 1.4 million Coloradans, our jurisdictional members, which is about a quarter of the state. We're 50% West Slope, 2/3 rural. So it's pretty diverse geographically in terms of type of community, resort communities, suburbs, small rural communities, just this kind of mix across the board. And the origin was really the sense that these individual communities started about 6 years ago that really wanted to do good work on climate, were running into barriers. They could do some things locally, but then would run into barriers, state policy barriers. They couldn't do more than they wanted or than they had accomplished already. And that was presented this huge limit on their ability to achieve reductions and begin to build out resilience and all of those things that communities care about climate. And the idea was, well, let's pull communities together, speak with one voice, and the insight worked. At the legislature, for example, when you all show up there, nobody cares what Durango thinks except your own state senator, your state representative. No other legislator cares what anybody thinks is outside of their jurisdiction, outside of their district. And the regulatory bodies, it's a little different, but still, if you're one jurisdiction testifying at the Air Quality Control Commission, they will listen, but it's very different than if you're there speaking on behalf of 39 jurisdictions that have the kind of geographic scope and population scope that our members have. So that dynamic is played out. That is at the core of what we are is this organization that amplifies local governments and local elected official voices in these venues to produce policy outcomes that strengthen policy. So the core of it is policy advocacy work up top, and that's a lot of its legislature, a lot of its regulatory bodies like the Air Quality Control Commission, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, PUC, and then increasingly some federal work that's really been governed by where the opportunities are. So at the moment, there really are some limited but real opportunities to do for us in Colorado to have an effect on what happens in DC. So we've been engaging in those ways. That's the core of it. And then we do a bunch of additional work to help you all be more effective as advocates on climate policy, or to communicate with your constituents, or to figure out what to do locally, or how to make your local programs connect better to other local programs or state programs. And so the other things on the list are those kinds of other resources or capacity building.
I have a question for you.
Yes, please.
I noticed that several counties were also members, but I didn't see La Plata County. Had we approached them before, or and if so, is it maybe time to reconsider?
Thank you for the question. And yes, we talked to La Plata. It's been several years, and they were interested, but I think they were in tight financial circumstances.
I don't think that's the case anymore.
Right.
Well, so again, maybe it is time to circle back to them. I don't have any relationships, or very limited relationships there now, but maybe that's a
I
conversation.
did give them the name of the commissioners,
Okay, good, yeah.
and I think that you might want to consider reaching back out.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Especially since you're in town, I was hoping that you might
I'm
be
happy
able
to help facilitate that.
That'd be great.
Perfect. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah. Here's the list. I won't linger on it, but
Right.
you have that in your packet. Very quickly, organizationally, every jurisdiction has a seat on the board. On paper, it sounds, I come out of the nonprofit world, a board of 39 people sounds insane. It actually works extremely well, far better than you would imagine. And I think it's largely because every member is really a member because they want to be, because they're aligned. We're all here to go figure out how to make policy change happen. And then there's a lot of we spend a lot of energy on the relationships and the rapport and the trust, and the result is it functions extremely well. I don't take it for granted. We put a lot of effort into maintaining the culture of the relationships, but so far at least we've been able to sustain that. And then we have these two main committees. Finance committee is what you would expect, financial oversight, budget, and then the policy committee does oversight for all of our policy, all of our advocacy work. And they have a subcommittee called the legislative group or subcommittee, and they really just focus on the legislative session, which is 4 months of the year. And occasionally we'll create ad hoc groups when there's a very particular question. Sometimes we need more expertise, technical depth than we have among our folks. And so we can put together an ad hoc that draws on some of the expertise among our member jurisdictions, or bring in folks that are gonna be particularly interested in diving in on something. This is where I will talk at high level and run through things quickly, but I'm happy to talk about any of the specific bills or any other questions you might have. Legislative session 2019 and 2021 were hugely transformative on climate. We got a huge number of bills passed and collectively transformative in a lot of ways, like the power generation system in Colorado. This is a very clear inflection point, and we are now dramatically shifting toward a system that's based heavily on renewables and storage, and just thinking fundamentally about how to run electricity differently than we have in the past. 2022 was not as dramatic, and I think it's partly because we were in an election cycle and a particularly high profile one. So the legislators and the governor's up. And so there was focus on other things. And also I think leadership just felt like they had spent a lot of energy on climate over the previous several sessions. So there was less there, but even so, we ended up passing a bunch of really meaningful bills. And that gives you kind of high level sense that we did pass a bunch of things that were consequential. I wanted to just flag, there were 6 high priority bills for us that passed. We didn't win all of our priority bills, but we got most of them done. And I will just flag them. The first is this producer responsibility bill, and that will basically create a system where producers will pay a fee. And this is whether you are manufacturing and distributing in Colorado or you're exporting into Colorado. You'll pay a fee based on the environmental footprint of the packaging. And that money then will go into a pot that then gets distributed out to local governments across the state to pay for your recycling programs. So it takes these costs that have been externalized forever, which are the environmental cost of packaging. How recyclable is it? How much recycled content does it have? How much weight? How heavy is it? Which has an effect on fuel consumption, and builds that into the market. The price itself will reflect those qualities. So now they're just built-in market. It's not regulatory. It's just the market itself is going to drive innovation and different kinds of thinking about packaging makes the most sense. And you think toothpaste is a great example because you have the tube, then you have the cardboard box, then you have the shrink wrap, that have all the cardboard boxes, and those packaging choices have real environmental impacts and real climate impacts as well. And then that money then goes into a pot. It will take a few years to ramp up, but the result is jurisdictions that run their own recycling programs will get reimbursed. Jurisdictions that don't, the provider can get reimbursed for providing that service to residents. So the idea is basically everybody in Colorado should have recycling service that is at least as good as their normal trash service. And there's nothing imposed on local governments. It is basically just money to compensate or reimburse local governments for a service they're providing, or to offset the cost to the residents. So that's probably the biggest single bill. Air toxics gets CDPHE to start looking at some toxics that are recognized by the federal government as toxic pollutants, but they don't have a regulatory regime. EPA has never actually done anything about them. And the bill will set CDPHE on the path of beginning to look at those and figure out, do we need to regulate some of those for public health and environment reasons? The air quality investments is just a ton of money. It's already starting to flow, and it will be supplemented by the infrastructure bill that Congress passed back in the fall. And now this new bill that the president, I don't know if he signed it yet, but is slated to sign today if he hasn't yet, that will also send just huge amounts of money into the state and across local governments.
Just did.
Can you
Got a
talk-
notification like an hour ago.
The 124?
Yeah, for
Transportation, can you talk about that?
Yes, a little. If you want to go into depth, I'll need to come back with more detail. But the transportation, so there's several pieces. One is just straight electrification or transitioning vehicles to zero carbon fuels or low carbon fuels in some cases. So that's one piece of the puzzle. Another is the infrastructure itself, like the charging stations. Another is multimodal and transit, and how do you integrate all those pieces? And that last bucket, that's where a lot of that money is going to go to.
It's for grants.
Some of it, it's not all grants, but some of it is. Some of it will get distributed through CDOT and then through the MPOs and the transportation planning regions.
Great.
Is that the enterprise funds? Or?
Yeah, I don't remember if that 124 includes the enterprise funds or not.
Okay.
It must, that all, actually, I think the enterprise funds must all be embedded there, because that's a lot of money. Except this is all this year, so I'm gonna just try that again. I think this is all new money on top of the enterprise funds. The enterprise funds were last year, and it was a pile of enterprise funds. It was 4 in total, I think, new ones, and then 1 pre-formulated one. Each of those created some kind of a fee that is now beginning, they are now beginning to get implemented, and those fees then will get accumulated into an enterprise fund that will then spend the money on specific purposes. Like there's a clean transit enterprise fund, and those fees then go into this pot that a brand new board that runs the enterprise fund will distribute those dollars. That is largely grant money, I think, CTE. There's 4 of them, they all have different rules. They all, in the last few months, have finished their plans and are starting to figure out how their grant processes are going to work. So these dollars are going to be on top of the enterprise fund.
So what I'm hearing is that Marty and Sarah need to stay on top of the opportunity for this
That's what
funding.
that's what I was, yeah.
Yeah, we have, and as Jacob was just saying, that I mean, there's so many layers of funding around climate action. A lot of it is around renewable energy, being more energy efficient in our built environment. And then when we're talking about transportation, it is changing the type of transportation we're using. So, we talk about vehicle miles traveled, so ways to reduce total vehicle miles traveled, but then also electrification of our transportation. I kind of think of those as some of the main areas, and that those are directly reflected in our community sustainability plan, of course. When it comes to the transportation specifically, that gets broken down into public facing infrastructure and incentives to go to electrify and alternative transportation such as e-bikes, transit related fleets, and then municipal fleets or other like business related fleets. So those are kind of the 3 buckets. I can't remember the 4th bucket.
Great, it's great to know that it's there. And that
Yeah,
you guys are
it
on
is. We are on it. So, but we don't have to spend all day on it. But
Yeah, I'm glad.
Yeah.
Very good.
All these grants and dollars to support these initiatives are awesome, but every single one of them puts a higher burden on low-income people for costs. Whether it's delivery of things, the fact that they can't afford to buy an EV vehicle, the fact that then they're paying higher gas prices, all of those things. So do any of these bills have any mitigation for the impact on the lower income population?
Yes, I appreciate that question very much. It varies by program, but a lot of the programs have those, the state often calls them equity concerns or DEI concerns, it's the same language lots of government folks use. A lot of those programs have equity components built into how grant money or disbursements are prioritized, and what kinds of projects have to have a certain degree of attention to how to make sure the benefits are distributed.
Yeah, so that's not exactly what I mean, because these are upfront costs that people have to pay that they may not be able to afford as things keep increasing. And yes, they get some benefit down the line, like they get a better bus route, but that doesn't help them when their income is so low that prices them out of buying something they need for their children or for themselves. So are there ways to mitigate that upfront impact in these bills?
If I'm understanding your question, a lot of these won't play out like that, because they're like fleet, for example, the school buses, those don't directly, nobody's paying out of their pocket in a direct way for those.
So where's the money coming from to pay for those buses?
Well, a lot of it is coming on fees on industry, components of industry.
Sure, and who pays when costs in industry increase? The people who buy the goods.
Now I see, yes.
So the people who buy the goods are actually the ones ending up paying for the program. So I'm not saying this is a bad thing.
I
I'm
understand
just
what you're
asking
doing.
how do we mitigate this cost on lower income people?
That is a big, complicated question. I'm not sure I definitely don't have a simple answer. I'm not sure I have a complete answer for you. Some of those programs are designed to very specifically offset some of the things you're talking about. So for example, some of the like charging infrastructure. So we know that if
People with low incomes don't have electric cars normally.
what we're seeing now is the market for inexpensive electric vehicles, the universe of models is exploding, partly because of regulatory changes in Colorado and elsewhere. meaning models that are below $15,000, below $20,000, not the $60,000 and $70,000, $80,000 models. Some of this pairs with like federal tax credits. So the IRA, the bill that the president just signed, has tax credits for EVs that are specifically capped income-wise and also include used vehicles, so that used EV market is, so it's
Right,
not,
so
it's
tax
not,
credits only work for people who have to pay taxes. So I'm talking a different population than you're talking to. It's the same thing with the housing, with making green housing, which I totally support. I mean, I have solar panels on my house. It's as energy efficient as I can make it at this point in time. But that makes that house more expensive. It makes every building more expensive. So my request maybe would be, maybe where I'm going with this is making a request that when you do policy at a state or federal level, you're also looking at not how does the broader impact happen, but there's some very, very specific impacts. And with the cost of housing today, our lower income people are being heavily challenged, and more people are falling into this category. So as a policy, I would love to see you add that into what you're doing when you're doing these really beneficial things. But make sure that we're not penalizing people who can't take advantage. They might get on the bus, and that's great because now they have a bus to get on. But up front, it's really, really difficult. So that would just be my request. Is
I
take that
appreciate
into
that.
consideration.
and I apologize for being slow to get.
No, that's okay. I'm not explaining it very well. I know we always get so enthusiastic about all the good that this does and the money that comes to the community for better goods. But I also know that there's impact on, like on the people who live across the street from me, who live in low income senior housing. I know there's an impact on them for every price increase and everything. So I just trying to be kind of cognizant.
I do appreciate that, and I'd be happy to talk some more. I do think a lot of the bills that have been passing are very intentionally directed at those kinds of concerns. A lot of the coalitions bring in affordable housing groups and the environmental justice groups that are actually part of the coalition that is figuring out how do we design the language so it doesn't have inadvertent impacts or doesn't exclude people for the kinds of reasons you're talking about. I didn't do a very good job either of speaking to that, but that's not to say we couldn't do a much better job, and we should. And I would love to talk some more about where you're seeing some of those problems surface so we can figure out how to do better.
Well, there's a delivery fee, for example, now 0.45% or whatever on products. And so all that does is make things more expensive. It's
So
just that.
I'm going to suggest that you actually, in the interest of time, keep moving. But I think you've gotten the point that
Yeah,
from a policy point of view, how can we be as inclusive as possible?
Thank you, Mary. I really do appreciate that. The questions. I will spend even less time on these three. Building code, energy code is another one of the big bills that passed. We several years ago passed a bill that set a floor across the state for energy code, and this bill just raises that floor.
This is a big one. Yeah.
And so not to belabor, but to the point that you were raising, one of the reasons that we ended up supporting the bill the way we did is we did a bunch of research, and by that I mean mostly work with groups that have deep technical expertise in building codes, energy codes, and building costs, and made sure that the cost of meeting those codes or the process of building to that higher code doesn't result in a more expensive home, because that would defeat the purpose. So
how do you do that?
Well, I'm happy to chat more with you. Yeah, but that is it is a top concern for a lot of folks. A lot of our folks, our jurisdictions, which are made up of people like you and other jurisdictions that are certainly thinking about affordability in their communities. The transit piece, mostly Front Range, but it was grant money available all over the state during August to make transit free for transit districts that wanted to do that.
Really great.
Yeah, and that is it's unclear how impactful it is yet. We don't have data yet, but very clearly designed to benefit lower income households that either don't have cars, or if they could take transit for free, that would reduce their transportation costs. And then that last piece is there's this new office, or will be a new office that's focused on disaster recovery, but it's also pulling together funding from a bunch of different sources. The idea is basically we're really good, we collectively at the state and federal level, at responding to natural disasters when they're in crisis. Like, we know how to do that partly because we just do it so much now, but we're not so good yet at the recovery and rebuilding. Once all the federal resources leave and the state resources or the state emergency services depart, then the communities are left to rebuild. And the idea here is let's create a mechanism. This was the the governor's vision. Let's create a mechanism that pulls all those threads together so that when communities do face those disasters, the recovery piece is a lot simpler for the local governments and other stakeholders to take
Was
advantage of.
that inspired by the Marshall Fire?
I think that the political will to get it done as quickly as it got done was probably Marshall Fire driven. I think that the idea had been floating for a while, but the Marshall Fire definitely created a political path to get it done. I will not talk about any of these unless you ask about them, because that will take time. I just want to flag, these are all regulatory and policy efforts that produced real fruit over the last year. One of particular note that I'll just flag is Tri-State's 80% commitment, which 3 or 4 years ago, I think had anybody with CC4CA predicted we would be where we are now with them, you would have been laughed at, and that's pretty colossal. And I'd say with Excel too, their commitments that are locked into their electric resource plan are also enormously important from a decarbonization perspective. As well as a community transition perspective. Lots of these pieces will result in money flowing to support both the communities and the workers themselves, particularly in coal-related industries that are transitioning. Happy to talk about any of those, but just to say on the regulatory side, it's kind of an equal venue for us in terms of our resources and effort, and secured a lot of successes there as well.
I would just also highlight for our region the orphaned well rules and the fixing oil and gas leaks. You all are aware of the methane hotspot is known for our region. Of course, this is state of Colorado, and we live in the Four Corners region. But making sure that when we are if there's the economic benefit of oil and gas drilling, but then if the companies leave, they have leaking pipes, they have abandoned wells, the communities are the ones that suffer the consequences of that, right? So having those rules in place for our region is pretty important.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Oh, sorry. I put these up. We track this stuff carefully. The point is not that we try to, the point isn't to maximize the number of times local elected officials do things. The point is to secure these policy victories, but this is the mechanism for it. So I put it up here, mostly just to give you a sense of how central elected officials and local government representatives, sometimes staff, are to being able to do the work that we're doing. It's because lots of local elected officials and other local officials will testify or write op-eds or be part of meetings with members of the state legislature or the governor's office or the federal delegation. And that is truly what we are doing fundamentally, is making sure the voices of local governments and local electeds are present in policy decision-making venues where they aren't necessarily otherwise, particularly around climate. And those numbers just give you a sense of how much of that actually happens. I'll mention also that often we work with a lot of individual elected officials that their jurisdictions are not aligned politically, wouldn't join CC4CA, wouldn't want to engage in climate advocacy, but they might be as an individual. So we also work with folks like that a lot. I don't think I put that up there, but it's something like 35 or 40 other jurisdictions, elected officials from those jurisdictions also were part of the work we're doing. So that we're making sure that the voices of local officials and local governments are very present in these key moments when legislators, for example, are deciding what the new round of state laws are going to look like. And then just to piggyback on that, that's the place where I think, to whatever extent you all want to be involved, one of the ways to be involved is actually doing that kind of work. And Councilor Youssef has testified multiple times, is fantastic. If you guys, any of you want to do things like that or op-eds or be part of meetings with state legislators that we organize around climate issues, thrilled and happy to work with you on that. Our job, the way we look at it, is make it as easy and low friction as possible for you all. Elected officials are busy and you're not necessarily domain experts in all of the policy arenas, and nobody expects you to, the legislature, nobody, or the regulatory bodies, they don't expect local officials to be experts, but they care about your voice because you are there representing constituents that elected you to represent them. And our goal is just make it seamless as possible for you all to plug in. So to whatever extent you want to do that, please do. I'll also say on the policy side, that is also heavily driven by our members. So as an example, and to circle back, as we're thinking through what should we focus on this legislative session, or what kinds of amendments do we want to see in a bill in order for us to support it, or to put pressure on how to shape the outcome of those debates, that's another place where you all can plug in. And so it's welcome to whatever extent, whether it's just conversations you and I have, or if you want to plug it in a more formal way, welcome that kind of engagement as well. And then I will just end on this. There's a lot happening that we know about. Lots of regulatory proceedings are queued up. Mostly that's a list of regulatory proceedings that we know are coming. It's a lot of acronyms that I'm happy to explain, but I won't take the time unless you ask for your benefit. And a few other things, the Inflation Reduction Act, that is now law, but it will take some time for all of this program, like the infrastructure bill from the fall, we're just now starting to see those dollars flow. And that's just the first round of programs. It will take several years for all those programs to get stood up and begin dispersing money, and then to actually disperse all those dollars. The same things that be true with the IRA. That's the best possible thing chosen. That's what they did. So that's another piece that we'll spend a lot of time working on as well. And then the legislative session will kick off in January. And it's really hard to predict, given that it's an election cycle, given that there's a lot of varying predictions about what will happen to control of chambers and what that will mean for climate policy. I can't make any meaningful predictions now, but that there will be legislative opportunities probably and needs certainly to be engaged there. And so we'll be ready for that, whatever it looks like. I will stop there. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Marty or Joe, what is our fee, our annual fee that we pay?
Our fee to CC4CA, $5,000.
I say, wait, I would think we're getting our money's worth.
Right. Yes.
I'm glad you hear that.
Questions?
Great.
Jacob, sorry, Jacob. Well, thank you. And you're on a tour around visiting various communities?
Yeah, visiting mostly members. I was with the URA commissioners this morning and last night, and I'll visit with Mountain Village and some of the other folks up there tomorrow.
Great.
Yeah, we haven't traveled because of COVID, and so this is the first time I've
Yeah,
been
it's
able.
really great to have you here in person.
I feel so lucky to get.
Yeah, it's really
you guys live
nice.
in the most beautiful place in the world, and it's just nice to be able to actually meet folks in person.
And I did talk to him, about one of the most important things that we can do, if we're so inclined, is this, advocacy, testifying as local officials, just as your own person. And so one of the things you can do, unless we decide to support it as a council, but when I testify as myself. But what we can do too is you can share with Jacob any interest that you might have, that you feel passionate about that, and he can just make note of that and let you know when there's opportunities to support various legislative efforts around those initiatives, if you're interested, so inclined. He just mentioned that it's really very helpful, and I would reiterate that they do make it very easy. I mean, you can say, yeah, I'd be very happy to. I need talking points, and they'll, right there they come, and so it makes it really quite easy. You don't have to do a lot of research, or if you want to, you do, but they make it very easy to do. And it's wonderful that we can, and Jacob thinks they will continue with this hybrid mode, because you just zoom in and there you are at the state capitol.
Get better participation that way.
And it's probably more energy efficient.
Yes,
Right.
among other things.
That is all very true.
This would be a whole
Thank
lot
you.
different. things
Thank you.
we had to
Appreciate it very much.
track up there. to
Yeah.
do it.
Marty, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Jacob.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, you bet. You're welcome.
Council, we have a hour-and-a-half session, I think, planned for Public Works and everything else. I'm just asking, would you like to take a break now, or maybe go like 45 minutes into the first session and then maybe take a break?
Sure.
Does that work for folks?
That makes more sense.
All right, so then, because it's going to be a long session, there's a lot of detail. I was at the Infrastructure Advisory Board meeting last night. So the whole crew should come on up and sit up here. And you can make room around I have to turn my phone off.
Oh, great, thank you, James. Appreciate it.
We're staring at Christina behind you, not you. She's got all the tech.
Kevin is, where's Kevin? Is he coming up?
See, because I apologize for standing. A little bit of a back issue today, so it's feeling a little better.
Kevin, are you joining us also at the
Oh,
table?
yeah.
Kevin Hoff? We just had you on the list, so. That's, if not, no,
There's
no.
one item on there that I will come up and join.
Okay. No problem, great.
And we can swap out when it comes to Justin's. Leave him all by himself.
So I'm gonna welcome all of you here. And last night, I do want to say we had our infrastructure advisory board meeting, which discussed a lot of these projects, a lot of detail. And I want to thank you for coming back with answers, to questions within like 14 hours or something like that. So I appreciate that very much. And Allison, I think it's your show. So
Well, we will start off. The Public Works Group has multiple enterprise funds and works with the 2019 sales tax as well. So we've been looking at CIP projects and wanted to get feedback from council today based on the information that was shared with IAB last night. The areas that we're going to discuss today are the sales tax capital projects fund, which is general fund or near general fund, sewer fund and water construction fund. And then I believe there's technology and Rogers tax, right? Okay, so those are outside our wheelhouse. We wanted to really focus on the purpose of the item being to have the opportunity to discuss the board prioritized and staff proposed capital improvement projects, provide staff direction on other projects that are slated to be included in the 2023 capital budget. And this is really intended as discussion format where we can take in and get back to you anything that you want. And the budget will be proposed obviously in October. So Christina and Devin have put together a great presentation for us. Water fund starts with being related to effective infrastructure network. And I will turn it over to Justin to go through the water fund capital projects.
hold on 1 second.
All right.
Just so that we go into the microphone, can you guys go through and just announce and people can recognize your voices?
I'm sorry. I'm Allison Baker, I'm Public Works Director, City of Durango.
Keith Doherty, city engineer.
Justin Elkins, utilities manager.
Christina Burkle, budget analyst, here for Devin.
Perfect. This is new additions to the study session.
And so
Would you like us to go through? And Bob Rammer, Chief Police.
Kim Baxter.
Oh, I would.
He was.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're good. Okay.
Thank you. So we did go last night through the list of projects with IAB, and we'll come to the recommendation as we get a little farther into it. The way it was presented 2 weeks ago seemed to be very effective. So we wanted to approach it as a opportunity for, I know you've had a lot of information on a lot of projects, but if you want to ask questions, to start from that direction rather than simply walking through all the projects, which is probably more than some of them I know you already know about. So,
Council, do you have some thoughts on anyone that you want to particularly discuss?
How long have we been doing 5-year water capital project's timeline? Has that one been a while that we've been doing that?
It has been. The 10-year was more common prior to my arrival. I'm really tend to focus on a 5-year, whereas
Right.
finance tends to look at the longer
Yeah.
picture. So we have narrowed it down so that it will be much more focused and intentional rather than buckets of money.
Interesting.
And I will share with council that the top 3 on the list, the Lake Night Horse, the 3 million gallon tank, and the Florida pipeline, they were the bulk of the conversation last night.
I can imagine.
And you can imagine we got into the nitty gritty about sizing and wrenching and it was, again, it's great to have engineers on and water specialists on the advisory board. So those were the top 3 that took. So if you have no priority, I would suggest we start with those unless somebody has something.
Well, I
burning.
think you being the liaison and being part of the conversation, is there anything that council should know about any of those 3 items
Sure.
that you were discussing? Because we wouldn't otherwise necessarily know unless we meeting.
You know, we talked a fair bit about Lake Night Horse, but what was actually surprising was the 3 million gallon tank. We talked at length about whether that was needed now, and then some new information came up. So I might suggest you recap that and then the information you found and then your view of the importance of this project. Because they were talking about, could we actually postpone it and do some other things sooner?
Yeah, I can start there. So this is a project we started in 2014, and we contracted with Bohannon Houston for the design on this project. And since 2014, we've been rolling money over year after year after year. Here we are. So it is the opinion of a person, and rightfully so, opinion of the person on the infrastructure advisory board, that if we haven't done this project in 8 years, is it really needed? Additionally, in the water master plan, it was shown that the existing clear well at the College Mesa Water Treatment Plant can effectively treat the water that we need by the demand of the city currently. However, we went back and looked. We've been rolling this project over and over because we couldn't get Bohannon Houston's real buy-in on that. We finally got their buy-in and we issued a change order. So we have been working, we're ready to go to bid in February of next year on this project. As for the existing clear well and the necessity of the project, there was the incorrect baffling factor used in the water master plan, which showed that the clear well would actually be able to treat the total amount of demand for the city and address both of those issues, and send an email to all the members of the IAB to let them know.
So the baffling miscalculation, actually, when you fixed it, showed that we couldn't meet the demand. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So currently what we do is we have a clear well, which is about 300,000 gallons, and then we have the 7 million gallon storage. And when we report our contact time to CDPHE, it requires that we use both of those to actually meet the contact time required.
Okay.
So we've done inspections on the 7 million gallon tank, and we need to do some repairs on the 7 million gallon tank. There's some corrosion along the rafters. It can't really handle the snow load. In general, we want to do baffling mixers in the 7 million gallon tank as well. The only way that we could do that is if we take the 7 million gallon tank offline. Can't necessarily work in it when it's full of water, right?
You're not a scuba diver.
Exactly.
They have sent scuba divers down there.
We have.
For
Look at
for inspection.
For inspection.
Yeah, not
And
for.
road
Not for-
or-
not for pleasure.
But if we're going to take the 7 million gallon tank offline, which we will need to do sooner rather than later, we need somewhere to meet the contact time that the clear well does not afford us.
Right.
And when we look at the raw numbers on it, we do get virus inactivation in 300,000 gallon clear well, but we don't get GRD activation. So if we take the 7 million gallon tank offline for even an hour, we're issuing a boil water notice to everybody in the city.
The other one, I think, just to set some context, there's a few more. I think the Florida pipeline rehabilitation, there was real concern about, well, is that going to go or whatnot? And I think you need to talk about the bandwidth and explain that to council as well, why we're not staging things sooner.
Sure. So the utilities division is set up to write RFPs and basically direct what projects will be done over the next 5 years, not 5-year plan. The CIP division is currently getting stood up and taking on the responsibility of bringing those projects to fruition. So when it comes to the bandwidth and the utilities division, we have the utilities engineer whose time has been dedicated to a lot of other projects, especially water line designs throughout the city. And then also design issues that come up through engineering, through development, through inspections. He's answering a lot of questions. What we would like to do with the Florida Pipeline Rehabilitation Project is next year rebed the pipe that is currently eroded or the ground around it is eroded. We want to rebed the pipe that's currently in Edgemont Ranch. And then we're going to push out to 2025 before we begin a relining project on the Florida pipeline. So we had the break we presented in the previous meeting in the winter with 21 days downtime. We have the animus effect technical memo that basically tells us that there's too much manganese in the animus to bring it up to terminal reservoir in the winter. And so we want to begin working on the Florida pipeline. However, the design for the slip lining project, the construction or design management, and then construction, we don't have the bandwidth to do both of those, both the Lake Night Horse pipeline and the Florida pipeline rehab at the same time within the utilities division. One of the biggest things that I've heard from council, and one of the things that I aim to deliver, is doing what we say we're going to do. And although it would be nice to complete our wish list in the next 2 to 3 years, it's not something that we're going to be able to do, and I want to be realistic about that.
So between the Lake Nighthorse and the Florida pipeline, which one is more critical to maintaining our water supply currently?
In our view, in the utilities division's view, it's Lake Nighthorse. How come? Because we had 21 days downtime from 21 to 22. Prior to that, we had 2 to 3 days over each year. But it's the Florida pipeline, although it's 70 years old, cast iron pipe, seems to be holding for us right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Additionally, we don't
1950s.
know it's that longer depth. So that's something that we'll be working on under the operation and maintenance budget next year in the water department, is that we will be doing ground penetrating radar to actually locate the pipeline. Currently, we don't know its location, which was one of the issues with repairing the failed section of pipe in the winter this past year.
That's why it took so long.
There's one I think the council needs to be aware of, and Allison, you brought it up yesterday. That was on the safety issue of the parking area at the Santa Rita water treatment facility. You mentioned the big tree being in the way and the angle. Can you explain that to council and how that came to be? And it's going to show up eventually, but I want them to be aware, just as we think about priorities.
Sure, there is a later project to reconstruct the road into Santa Rita plant. And part of this work was the parking lot area nearby with the park was reconstructed with the project last year. And there were
And that was a park and rec design.
that was a Parks and Rec design. In order to fund that parking lot construction, we did delete the roadway that comes into the plant that takes heavy equipment, that takes trash trucks in and out, and consistently has a back truck on it. It's obviously designed for use a different design vehicle than what you're using in the parking lot. It's a more significant thickness of asphalt that will be installed. But, excuse me, there's some geometric problems at the entrance. And
It's pretty tight.
It
It's very
is.
tight.
Yeah.
And I think if there's a tree, I think council needs to hear if there's an issue with a big tree, we need to hear about it now.
there is one tree on the corner as you come in. As you're coming in, it's on your right, and you'll see it right as you go around the corner. That may actually need to be removed. And I know nobody ever likes, I don't like removing trees, but in order to have safe function through that intersection, I think we do need to be looking at that.
So the question is, your timing of it, you balancing safety versus when you can get things done, but I wanted council to be aware of it for you to raise questions as well.
So back to the 3 million gallon tank. Once it's repaired, would you then take the 7 million gallon tank offline and repair it?
Yes, in the larger plan. So all of the projects that are listed on the page are the projects that we planned in 2023 that we have a CIP sheet for, we'll put into OpenGov and assign a number, et cetera. One of the projects that we have in the plan that wasn't assigned a number because we don't have a full scope for it yet is the rehabilitation in the 7 million gallon tank. And we are planning to sandblast, recoat, install mixers and baffling in the 7 million gallon tank. And that project is planned for immediately after the 3 million gallon tank.
So 2025.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Questions on the safety issue within the administration? When are you planning to do that?
Design is set for 2023, $70,000. 2024 budget is $250,000 for the Santa Rita entrance road. Or we could keep the tree and just take out the basketball court.
I mean, there will be, well, I say that because there will be trade-offs here. And the
Right.
community, as we know, needs to recognize this. And the tree was, I understand, was it planted without any, or is it just an?
It was an existing tree. We'll obviously work with Parks and Rec and, get the design. There's some wide drain pans that can probably be adjusted. We'll do everything we can to protect both facilities and the tree, but it is a possibility that we didn't want to be a last minute red flag. So, yeah.
And I also thought it would be helpful for council to hear the change in how you're going to work with the 3,000 linear feet.
Yes.
And how that's as a result of our CIP policy. But I think you guys should.
Yeah, so on the 5-year CIP, you'll see 4 projects that are marked as 3,000 LF with a year next to it. So 3,000 linear feet is what that stands for. Also in those projects go 2024 through 2027. There's a project in 2023 called Water Design for $150,000. So the plan here is to identify the water lines throughout the city that are in need of replacement. A design for replacement of those lines done in 2023, and then have a plan of action for 2024 through 2027. And talking with the engineering department, utilities engineer, and also staff, it seems like 3,000 linear feet is kind of max that we can accomplish per year. That's our bandwidth. And so I would like to stage that out over the 4 years from 2024 through 2027. And then pass that information along to the streets department so that there's no confusion on where utilities will be placed over the next 4 years, and then continue that process. Previously, we had a project called 1033 that we would reappropriate every year and just keep rolling over, which worked great when we had issues come up that were in dire need of replacement, and we could just pull from that and move forward. But my plan is, as I said before, doing what we say we're going to do. And that means identifying the lines that we plan to replace so that everybody's aware of what we say we're going to do. And
Well, then that's good for coordination between other departments, as you said, and everything else. So that's wonderful.
Couple thoughts. I guess I was not quite aware that we were going to do full Lake Campus project and the piping, and so that will, all in a row. I knew I thought we would talk about the engineering, but I didn't know we were planning, I'm glad to see this in the 5-year budget. And so that will allow us to pull, and that is the completion of the project to get water.
From Lake Night Horse all the way to Terminal Reservoir, College Mesa.
How we're paying for it hasn't been decided,
Exactly.
whether that's bond.
That was my next question.
Yeah,
So I'm
that's where we're
seeing
gonna go into it.
40, let's just call it $45 million worth of projects, or so, and that was my question to you over from 23 to 27
Mhm.
is, where that funding is
How are we
coming
gonna pay for it?
Alright.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one of the things we're trying to figure out ourselves. But what we're doing right now, with the $500,000 this year is a feasibility study as well as a process design report. So what we'd like to see from an engineer is the pipeline layout, where we want to run the pipeline, what the feasibility of running that pipeline looks like, what we're gonna run into when we do eventually do that. And also, when we have the connection completed, how are we gonna use the water? So that's one of the things that we're gonna look at, as well as the funding. So Southwestern Water Conservancy District essentially works as an arm of the state of Colorado and has specifically called out this area. It said Durango, Pagosa, but a few other areas that we need storage projects. And with the infrastructure bills just approved, the amount of funding that's available right now for water storage projects, we're in a prime time to get very cheap money for these projects.
So we would be looking for grant money in any of the phases that we can. But ultimately, what we started talking about last night at IAB was different scenarios of cash funding, which puts the water fund at insolvency in 2025 versus, and if you.
They're under fund balance.
Right,
Right.
and then the potential of bonding just Lake Night Horse Park if a bond passed, obviously. And that was close to workable. I think we got 2027 was when it went negative.
Well, you have to add the bond money into it, so it doesn't go negative, that's.
Right, and
But what it looks like from our calculations is if we bond funding for both the Lake Night Horse pipeline as well as the Rita rehabilitation, we will not see water fund go into insolvency. We will be set up pretty well to move forward with the rest of the projects that we've outlined in the 5-year CIP.
To do that, what is that, what would that entail, the bonding, your bonding process?
about $30 million, and we'd have to start with working with Dirk to determine the steps when we need to start advertising related to when we would anticipate needing the funding, and pretty much going from ground zero with that. I would think if we're talking 2025,
Yeah, there's an application process.
right?
So, yeah, we looked at it last night, and that was a good bit of what would happen to it. Because that also impacts what we do with the rate study, which we go. But to the salt fab, and Dave Peters is on both, we were saying, where is the debt policy of when do you issue debt? And and this is 2 big projects that, will have a long lifetime, 40, 50 years. So what's appropriate? So.
Sure.
And we played with it. We found some things Allison saw some things in the document we did yesterday that, we need to change this so that the fund balance will look better than we anticipated if you go with the debt.
And if we do, there are reserve requirements for the fund balance. If we are accepting certain kinds of bonds, it can vary a little bit, and there are obviously multiple criteria that would be considered. It's probably a couple of years out, but with that much capital intensive work coming up, we just wanted to start.
Having that conversation.
Exactly.
But you didn't talk about timeline as for example, when you would go to the voters or something do you know about when that would be? If you were
That'd be
to-
2024.
It would be 2024.
That we would need the funds, so yes, we'd have to.
That's when we go to the voters, or would you go in 23?
We would probably need to start letting the voters know what our plan is in 2023. And that would be based on the feasibility and process design report that we get from the engineering firm that we hire this year. So
2024 is a November election. Just, you know,
Okay,
23 is both.
it's both, it's
It's
April and
April.
November.
It's April, not November.
So it comes up fast, yes.
Yeah.
I also wanted you to describe the searching for the pipe issue, so that council's aware of it. Because I think there's some things you know, I'm learning all the time. And
right.
so the fact that we don't know where some of the pipes are.
Yeah, we don't know where the main feed for internal reservoir exactly is. So we are going to do ground penetrating radar in the spring of next year using operation and maintenance funds to get the lat long depth of the entire pipeline, which was brought up at IAB. We might also find out that we need an easement for where our pipeline is already. So that would give us an early tell on the direction we need to go for the project.
Well, there's a lot of pipelines in town. We don't know where they are too. It's not uncommon from that era.
Right.
Yeah, all right,
This one in particular.
Right, and a good bit of the city was built on top of it, so, there are challenges there, right?
And I'm gonna end with a fun project, the solar and the garden. If you want to describe it, how it may not cost as much as you think.
Oh, yes.
But that's not fun.
So the conclusion of the Santa Rita administration building will be the garden. So the design was completed earlier this year, and we are currently on a contract with Grasshopper Owen Town, which is running that project in the CIP division, project manager for parks. After it's completed, parks will take over the maintenance on that. But what we're looking at out there is 3 different gardens. One will be a pollinator garden, one will be a water-wise garden, and one will be a low water best view garden. And what we're looking to do there is we're joining with MSI and developing some signage out there to encourage people to plant pollinator species of flowers. We're also working with Durango Botanical Garden, and we're going to have volunteer docents to combine tours of the garden as well.
Nice.
And then across one side of the secondary clarifier, we're going to do a mural, pollinator themed mural.
Good.
That's excellent.
So that area of the river trail, the building looks so nice. The area itself is weedy. So we're going to, that'll be the last, that'll close out, and it's going to come in just over half of what we thought.
Excellent.
And then there's a solar project as well that we're working with Marty Poole, who's just up here. And we have $50,000 in design for next year to work with his overall sustainability goals throughout the city. But we have already done a layout at College Mesa for a very large solar farm. So we're looking to install some energy recovery equipment up there at College Mesa as well.
So while we didn't talk about every project, including, you know, like some big ones, but they were pretty explanatory. If you had any other questions, I also wanted you to share what the IAB came out with their recommendations. Unless there's other questions or projects.
Small question.
Yeah.
On the downtown excess 150,000,
Question.
what is that about for water?
Sure. So multimodal is planning to modify the concrete throughout
Yeah.
5th to 14th. It's an opportunity for the utilities to be updated from 5th to 14th as well. So what we're going to do is try to get ahead or alongside of multimodal moves pretty fast. It does a good job over there. Trying to get ahead of or alongside their design. So when they move forward on a construction project that affects everyone downtown, we can do the same, and everyone downtown is served once and not multiple times. The utilities underneath 5th to 14th on Main are a nightmare.
Yeah.
There's daisy chain water lines, a sewer line that's probably got offsets and elbows in it. Yes, we definitely want to, if somebody's going to touch downtown, we want.
So
to
we're
have
doing
an
sidewalks downtown next year in multimodal?
Design.
Design.
Design,
Right,
and this is design.
right.
This is design as well.
Okay.
You'll see it in the sewer as well.
Sooner, okay.
And are those pipes 70 years old that are downtown, we think?
That'd be older.
You think they're older?
Probably.
At least, yeah.
At least 70-year-old piping downtown.
Yeah, so this is design, okay.
Well, at least they're metal. The town I
We
came
think.
from, the pipes were square wood pipes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The hardware store still had them stocked in the back for replacement.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. I never heard of replace. I've seen the metal hoops, wood slats, yes, but
The whole pipe
was
wood.
okay. So, you know,
Thank
things
you.
could always, so things could always get worse, right?
Just be happy.
Okay, count your blessings. Got it. Okay, so just, do you want to do sewer first, or do you want this recommendation? You and
I just wanted you to hear it because water and sewer are different.
Mhm.
Oh, you put them together.
I put water and sewer together, that on 815, the Infrastructure Advisory Board provided general approval with a 5-0 vote, water and sewer funds, CIP planning proposed CIP construction for 2023, noting that some projects will be further refined in cost and scope.
So on the sewer though, they voted, and this, they voted to not support the transfer.
No, that was, excuse me, the 2019 sales tax.
Oh, the twin, sorry.
Yes.
That's different. Excuse me. Excuse me, thank you.
So, sorry.
It's a long day.
Yeah, right, and here you are on another one. I appreciate all the work, yes.
Why don't you take us through the sewer then?
Sure. All right, so what we're looking at with sewer, one of the larger projects is the Upper Ramada lift station, which sits right next to the railroad. It's a lift station that receives about 40,000 gallons per day and hasn't been updated for.
Is this the one that's by Rotary Park?
This,
Further
no,
north.
this was the one that has the easement issue with the railroad.
I thought several of them did.
So,
Again,
you're
counting
right.
my blessings.
Sorry.
so I just want to say in this discussion last night, so, this has been, and Dirk has been working on this easement.
Yes.
So the question it was raised, is there any real risk to our community by not getting this thing done? Because it's been going. And so I think that's the question you need to address is there a risk to the community because we're not able to move on this? And if there is, I think that, I would think all parties would want to know about that. So I don't know if you could answer that or not.
Right, so where this lift station sits, it is 1,000 feet from the next manhole. So if it did fail, we're looking at 40,000 gallons per day of sewage flowing into the manhole. Actually, it would flow toward the railroad before it flowed down to the river. But that'd be 40,000 gallons a day that we would have to highline or bypass, 1,000 feet of fused pipe down to the next manhole, which would be a very expensive project. What we're looking at in the manhole itself right now is it's so corroded that if we did clean it, we would cause damage to the piping and infrastructure in the manhole or in the lift station.
So what's the challenge with the easement of the train?
I haven't approached that yet. But my understanding is if we're working out there on a lift station that we own, we would have to coordinate that work with the railroad, and they would require that we have a watchman out there. Not fully spun up on all the coordination that we need to do with the railroad. My intention here was to get the design done first. So when we do move forward with that coordination, we're ready to go.
So Dirk, what are you saying is the
Yeah, there's a meeting set with the railroad within the next 2 weeks. And we began discussions about a number of easements, and I think we'll move forward to try to resolve the additional
Why wouldn't they want us to have an easement to fix something that's so critical?
I don't know that they don't, I think that it's a question of, they want to resolve, and my understanding is they want to resolve globally a number of these before they start parceling them out individually. That's been part of the issue. And so it's possible to, again, we have a meeting set with them. I think it's, maybe it's even less than 2 weeks.
Right, we said before September 5th.
So we would meet internally, our plan is to meet internally first, make a plan, and then we will meet with them soon. We will report back.
Yeah, look forward to hearing how that works.
And I'm not certain they're aware of what's at risk here. So I think it, it's just part of that. They need to be aware of what we're trying to prevent or at least mitigate if we have to.
Meetings on Tuesday of next week.
It was,
Yeah, but my plan and how the funds are staged is to complete design immediately as soon as we can. We've already done a process design report by Dewberry with a cost assumptions for that lift station with a full replacement, including a generator and overflow vault, which are required by CDPHE now to do any work on those stations. And that's the number that they came up with. Oh, they came up with a 2019 number. I added some $20 to it.
Thank you. That was the big one that we discussed. Is there others that you wanted us to be aware of?
As mentioned before, with the water line replacement project 1033, the sewer project will also be split out. It's not split out yet because I don't know exactly what the linear foot, what the unit of measure would be for sewer replacement or sewer relining. But that's something that we are working on as on an on-call basis this year, knocking down the most critical manholes and sewer lines throughout the city that need relining. But that sewer project will also be broken out, and we will identify the individual units that we will be replacing.
Similar to the way Columbine was set up with Needham and the areas right around it. It'll be in cohesive locations.
Other questions on this one? Let me just go to council a second. Would you like to take like a 5-minute break and then we'll switch to 2019 sales tax, or keep moving and possibly have a longer break between finished? Everybody good? Okay, let's keep going.
Thank you. So the 2019 sales tax has an ambitious list that we're excited about. This is the half-cent sale tax that began in 2019 and will go to 2028. And there is, if you're looking at the project list, there's one that says no project, and that is and was intended as an interfund transfer for streets maintenance work related, snow plowing, sweeping, striping, pothole repairs, that kind of work. And we were following the guidance of the strategic plan to reduce that each year, and this is roughly 25% in the 2023, where you see the $843,062. That is the interfund transfer, and the others, high dollar one that we're excited about is the County Road 250, 251, finishing up. The design is complete, and the right-of-way acquisition is underway, and beginning hopefully January, February, will be going to bid for construction. We're showing $3.3 million in that budget. And the intent is that we would not sign a contract with a successful bidder until we had approval, obviously, from council for $3.3 million and an IGA with the county agreeing that they would provide $3.3 million committed, that we wouldn't be signing a contract till we had that full amount. But with that said, we know the intent is that it will likely be a 2-year construction phase. But since there was money that needed to be finalized with the county, we wanted to put the full amount in as far as what we'd be looking for in appropriation this year for 2023 to be able to sign a contract. So that one was a little bit complicated.
We also, I explained that, we as a council only got to see a little bit of the streets. I think, Kevin, you're gonna show a little bit of, Keith, you're gonna show a little bit of it right now.
I can if you like.
Well, I don't know if we want to do that, but I wanted to just set the context that the advisory board also talked about, while this is the minimum to give the county a number, there might be some things that, you want to do to enhance the road, and they recognize that that was kind of a placeholder number to get the match from the county, if you will. So I wanted to add that discussion.
And if we are designed for future improvements where signalization can be added, hawk signal, the question you had asked about sidewalk, about why we were working on the north side of the road was simply the physical limitations on the south side of the road.
Well, the question that I didn't ask, but
Okay.
it seems like if you wanted sidewalks on both sides, would it be possible to actually move the road over toward the north so that you have room on the south? Because there's a road there, so there's obviously the sidewalk where the road currently is in that section. Move the road further north and still have a sidewalk on the north side. Is there room for that?
Well, I know we are acquiring quite a bit of land already on the north side to be able to install what we were looking at.
I'd say part of the difficult without further right of way acquisition, not knowing what that section on the north side look like, right? Because we're planning on that 10-foot section right now. And I think you mentioned about maybe changing that to a 5-foot
Well,
section,
and-
5-foot.
Well, or whatever, but if you moved it, you wouldn't have to have a 10-foot on one side then either. That would reduce the amount of sidewalk, not necessarily to 5, but whatever. it would
Right,
reduce
and I
it.
think we talked a little bit about that, some of the follow-up is that materials and 8-foot, so we probably wouldn't want to go 5 and 5 necessarily. And so I think if we're going to start shifting some of that to the north, essentially every foot that we take from the north, or that we want to, let's say, keep an 8-foot on both sides, we potentially need another 4 to 6 feet of right of way that we'd have to acquire. And north side is where we are going through a lot of right of way acquisition now, largely because a lot of the grades that we're going for and the driveways that we're going to have to accommodate that are existing, because we're going to have some walls to make sure that we can fit that sidewalk or that 10-foot trail on that north side. So as soon as we start shifting that around to accommodate or shift the road over so we can accommodate a sidewalk on the south side, it would affect that right of way acquisition potentially.
Yeah, and that's assuming that we stuck with 8 feet on both sides and all of that too. My only concern is that if we don't at least look at whether that's a possibility and whether or not that's an upgrade that, not with the county, but an upgrade within the city that we want to do, that we might be missing a huge opportunity to actually make that a better project for multimodal, for example, and safety. So it's just something I would hate to have us just ignore or not look at, and at least contemplate whether or not. I'm not saying do a full-on engineering study to find out whether or not you can, but contemplate the idea. And if it looks feasible and it's something that we want to do, which is to have it be consistent all the way down that section of the road and also to meet multimodal ideals, is that something then that we would want to investigate further?
I think we can, and I think that was part of, we brought some additional information if we wanted to talk about the detail, because I think at the joint city council DOCC meeting, it was hard to see and I couldn't drive, so I was happy to do that if you want to spend some minutes.
Can we just council support, because they're prepared to just kind of walk us through it. What because I couldn't see it at the last.
I know, it was difficult to see.
Thank you.
I wasn't able to drive, but.
Oops.
This was a little bit easier to see.
Oh, much better, thank you.
Tom has great equipment, yes.
I think part of what we discussed, or we tried to respond to Kim related to some of those questions on that south side.
Right.
Is related to these two buildings, because they're right up against the existing right of way.
Yeah.
So we have some difficulty there.
What are those buildings?
Those are storage buildings.
Yeah, storage.
So we have some difficulty with those storage buildings. Even if we could acquire right away, we'd have to physically move a portion of those buildings. So those buildings made it very difficult for us to do anything on that south corner. And as we move to the east, I mentioned in one of our responses that there's really, it's under this call out, unfortunately, there's really only these two residential properties that are there. And this portion over here, there's two more properties that exist, but they abut this steep slope. And so we start to very quickly run into properties that are undeveloped, right? And as we continue to the east, there's this existing development up on the hill. They own the steep slope that's on the north side of that edge abutting the roadway. So one, we would also need to acquire more right of way along that south edge, but we would be putting in some facility, a pedestrian facility or whatnot. The development that already has pedestrian facilities, albeit on top. Their portion of development where they're looking at their pedestrians and how they access the various roads to the east is already in place for the infrastructure with sidewalks up above. So that was where we decided to say, well, that's a steep slope. It's kind of a repetitive infrastructure. People who are trying to access that location for pedestrian mobility are really up on the hillside.
No, they're in Lumion.
What's that?
They're in Lumion.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, I'll keep going. So we're doing.
Right.
So coming through, so again, this is largely undevelopable hillside because it's so steep. When we get over to East Andros Village, there is some infrastructure that comes up to Lumion. One of the things we're looking at for which properties are left. So we have the two Lumion buildings right here, and they actually have pedestrian facilities that they created to come on the south side through Wilson Lane up to the county road 250 or 251, sorry. And then the only other properties left are the pawn shop, which is abutting 251 and PFBE through the fire station, upgraded that fire station number 3 here. They're very resistant to adding sidewalks along the frontage that didn't connect
Yeah,
anywhere.
so that's a problem because we had that conversation when I was on the planning commission for this building, and we talked to the fire district about that, and we said, could be a sidewalk along there at some point in a re-up, and they were like, okay, well, that's fine, we can deal with that, and now they're saying no. So
Well,
just-
yeah, and I think part of that too is related to how does everybody else kind of navigate through there? There is an ability for people to come through the south, there's access easements so that others can use the Lumion pedestrian access to get to the east. And maybe there's some opportunity to, have that conversation or include that where people could go to the fire station as pedestrian as well. But that was largely kind of how we illuminated that south side for those pedestrian improvements and really focused on the north side because if people are coming out to 32nd Street now, but if they're coming out to 32nd Street, they're really not going to the west to access anything on the outside. If anything that they're trying to get to, it's almost everything on the north properties until they get to Holly Avenue. And then once you get to Holly, you have facilities on both sides that you can access. So that was kind of how we ended up at the conclusion that we did. Again, if we want to look at going back to that south side and seeing if there's some shift to do, we can, but that would definitely affect our current design and also the right of way acquisition process.
When I drove that and the storage facility, I mean, it makes sense that it's on the other side, because you can't, I mean, that would be, you can't have a sidewalk there with those storage facilities there, or a nice one anyways. And it is so steep on that side, and and the transit stations on the other side. And so if you have a good crosswalk, like I feel like it makes sense to go to that one side. It's, I mean, like Florida Road, it's the big sidewalk is on one side of the street. Like, I don't think it is that outrageous. And I think it would, you know, I think it makes sense with the transit stop on the other side, and Lumion and the other, you know, the city development having sidewalks that go through to 251. I think you did a great job, and considering some of the constraints, I support it being on that side. It makes
I
sense.
like the traffic calming that you have that I didn't see at our meeting. Like, for example, you have a couple of center medians in there to slow the traffic down before the crosswalks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that's a really important point, that we need to make sure that that's really strongly emphasized. And the other one down further by the storage units, those probably won't always be storage units. That's something we have to keep in mind, that the city is changing. There's already been a lot more development on the north side of the road lately too. So the idea of putting the raised medians there too is, I think, is a good one.
Will there be a bike lane though, at least on the other side?
Bike lanes on both sides. yes.
Both sides, and how, so that's.
Yes.
similar to Florida.
Yeah. Is that,
How
And they can ride on
wide-
a 10-foot.
How wide is that?
I believe they're both 5.5.
If you've ever ridden north on Florida Road, though, you know that bike lane on that side of the road is horrible.
Yeah.
It's not very long, it drops off, and there's big, I don't know if there's sewer connections, water connections, whatever it is, there's stuff all over it. And it's not really very safe, so, you know,
I've ridden it a lot.
yeah. Not the one on the west side of Florida, the one on the east side.
not the sidewalks.
Not the sidewalk.
Right, the other one, that's the one I
Yeah.
read. Oh,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Because I don't
Yeah.
want to go the sidewalk, because
And there's some bumpy, weird,
a bunch of things.
there's bumpy,
So I-
weird spots where the
Yeah,
drains go under.
Yeah,
the-
there are,
Yeah.
but it's better than a lot of Durango, you know, as far as when I'm on my bike. But if we had something that could be hopefully well done.
And they're concrete bike lanes.
Yes.
They are, yeah.
And
So that's better than Florida.
No, Florida is concrete.
Oh, they're concrete too.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
We were mimicking
You'll have
the
drainage.
design that was on Florida.
Yeah.
And we had some feedback on whether this should be concrete or maybe pushed to asphalt.
And getting a signal at the transit stops, is there, I'm looking at Sarah, not to put her on the spot, but is there discussion on that? The hawk signal probably?
Well, again, yeah, going back to just
Thank you.
that rendering, it's not shown here because this is largely related to medians. There is a pedestrian refuge for people to cross. They can stop at the median island before they continue to the north side. And that's where we're setting it up. And that was in some of the follow-up. I wanted to put in some clips of the actual plans. You can see the call outs for the pole boxes, the actual electrical and fiber that we're going in to be set up for a signal to be put there. But they looked at it and it just wasn't warranted yet. Maybe in 10 years it will be. We can work with Sarah and
But
Devin at that time.
They'll have cuts in them, so someone in a wheelchair can get through to that raised median, but still be at level, but have some protection.
Yep, it'll be just like some of those other refuges where they're accessible for pedestrians just to pass through, pause if they need to. be able to-
And we're looking at construction for this in 2023.
Yes.
I know.
We'd like to go to bed.
It would be
So
phenomenal.
January,
It
It's
February.
so bad.
would be
Yeah.
phenomenal.
It would be so great. Okay.
Well, and one of the other things that I think we focus a lot on 32nd Street, but just to point out that there will be the sidewalks that are added 251
Right.
to help connect most of what's going on the west side, and I think we connected everything because I think the sidewalk on the east comes up to that edge. So we'll be getting those pedestrian facilities on that side as well that will essentially get us back to.
Which side are they on? They're on
There's existing sidewalk, it's hard to see into the trees over here. There's
Yeah.
existing sidewalk over here.
there.
But the rest we're proposing is the sidewalk on the west side kind of ends right.
And there's a median, it looks like, in that on 251.
There it
Yeah,
is.
and we talked about that, the people coming out of Bread and everything won't be able to turn left.
Not at both intersections.
Right, just
the
the
north
idea-
one, they have a restricted.
Yeah, I was
access.
gonna say, or they have to go to the south
South.
next to
We
it.
can
Get
go
out
south
and go
and
to
down.
that.
Oh, okay.
So construction would start in 2023, you'd be putting it out to bid, take us through the timeframe, of what you need to be doing to.
Right, so right now, as Allison mentioned, we're going through right of acquisition, we're sending out a notice of intent to all the property owners that are affected, to give them a heads up that we plan to start negotiating with them about the temporary easements, permanent easements, and permanent right of way that we might need from each individual property owner. That'll take the next few weeks before we actually start negotiating with them. And then overall, our schedule with the right of acquisition is to finish by December of this year. That's what they put in there. And anticipating that we'll stick with that deadline. And so somewhere around November, we'll start putting together our bid documents so that they're ready to go. Once we have wired all right away at the end of December, then we can roll right into January and start the bid process.
So we have our county commissioner meeting in October, they're putting it into their budget, and you explained that you need the full amount so that you could put out the RFP.
Right, before we sign a contract committee, we would want those funds.
So do we have agreement from them?
Not yet, we had the oral discussion
Right.
there, and I think it was gonna be hammered out at the next meeting, or
Well,
perhaps the city manager and.
That's what I was gonna say.
Potentially.
I think they need to have that
Yeah.
conversation.
I have a draft IGA that would specify that, so obviously when I get finished, I go to Dirk and get his feedback at that point. And then if you're interested, or the city manager, however you wanted to proceed with that, or maybe at that meeting.
I think it has to be generally accepted before our October meeting, because that's
Okay.
too close for their budget. It's not as much of a problem for us.
So I'm looking to Dirk on thinking of that. Are you and Jose, who's going to be working the primary lead on the IGA?
We're just getting started on the IGA. We've had some format, some forms.
Right.
And also basic format. Probably will be all three of us. I'll take the
And I have Chuck involved in it, yeah.
So I will assist Allison, and we'll try to get the IGA together soon. And so, yeah, time's flying by, so I think in the next few weeks we'll have after the IGA. And Cheryl and I have talked about the need for an IGA, so it will involve all of us.
It's first on my list after budget's done.
Because
Once we pass this off.
we don't want to miss their budget and then have to push this off.
We don't want to
Right.
wait.
Definitely not.
Understood.
Two other items that we talked about at length last night that I wanted council to be aware of as your liaison is the interfund transfer that Alice will bring, and then sidewalks. And I'd like to also set the stage for sidewalks is that we talked about, the cost of 50/50, and to your point, only people who can afford it can participate, and that there's a problem. So I wanted to make certain you allowed time to talk about those two items and turn it back over because they were a lot of discussion around.
And I think sidewalks are huge.
Okay, sorry, about this, please stay on this if that's.
No.
Other.
Okay.
Excuse me, the other for large project that I did want to mention that we've got planned for 2023 is North College Drive. And that's, Keith has coordinated with the property owners in that area. And the idea is to remove the speed bumps and still maintain some traffic calming, improve the water quality drainage, reduce some flooding issues, and we're in good position on this one.
Yep, and we also have a water and sewer component of that, that's included in Justin's budget. But yeah, largely just rebuilding the road, like said, landscaping, water quality, traffic calming. Did add a median island and a minor chicane to the one side that we want to work with. We're putting in the bulb outs, similar to kind of what we're looking at with Main Avenue, kind of restricting that travel section so that people slow down. So it's kind of the alternative to the speed bumps, but we reserved the potential to put some other treatment in the future back if we find the ones aren't reducing it quite as much as we thought, reducing the speed as much as we like. And some of the neighbors were still pushing for the speed humps or some treatment. So keep that in our back pocket. We can come back to that and revisit it later, but right now we're going to try this alternative.
How come there's been the decision to get rid of the speed humps?
It's kind of a mixed bag with the neighborhood. Some people love them and some people really don't. A lot of it is the large complaints about the noise. When you're right adjacent to, you come through and you hit that bump and then you key on past. And so there were several people I'm understanding that wanted them removed. And so we talked about the possibility of putting in speed cushions, which are kind of the separated ones where larger emergency vehicles, the wheel well can pass through that one of the bumps, the smaller vehicles have to go. It's one of the speed cushions. But it still comes back to some of that noise issue.
Yeah.
Because when you're house right next to it, you should hear that constant thud as vehicles go by all the time. Either that or scraping if they haven't slowed down.
Well, I think scraping on West Second and also on Forest, I think it is. Part of the problem is the warning signs, the things that's on the humps. They're hard to keep on them. You don't see them either.
Right.
Especially if it's shady or anything like that, or if it's snowing, you don't see them. So they're actually kind of dangerous on a bike.
Yeah, the nighttime when some of that striping is worn off and you don't have that visibility and you don't see them, particularly at night, they do catch people by surprise. One of the other things we've been talking about is just the emergency response. Is you look at a lot of those signs on the existing speed humps around town, they say slow 15 miles an hour.
Right.
The speed limit is 25. You are allowed to go 25 through there. So slowing emergency vehicles down to 15 is not necessarily the goal. And so that was something we were working with DFP about. It's just what's the appropriate way of slowing traffic down? Getting people down to 20, 25 is okay. We don't need to go down to 15 miles an hour.
There's certainly a maintenance issue, obviously, in snow plowing and working in there. So we're trying to move away from those and come up with alternatives that work, but are not quite as intrusive.
Did you get from Cynthia or whoever the underpass frontage road to Laposta, Turner to Sawyer?
I'm sorry,
the underpass frontage road to Laposta, Turner to Sawyer question answered that I asked, because there wasn't a project sheet for that, and I just wasn't sure what that referred to.
This is work that we're looking at in the strategic initiative areas coming up. Scott's been presenting those to you, Laposta and Durango Mesa, and where's the third one? Three Streets. So we're looking toward the future with those, but not in the 2023 budget. So
no, I understand.
that's why there's no description. There is work that would need to be done to access Laposta Road more effectively than we currently have. We were looking at several possibilities.
So this is related to our Main Street impact fee and our Trip 2030 plan, which has the Trip 2040 update, but we have a list of major streets that are on that list where the major street impact fee applies to. We've actually accomplished several things on that Trip 2030 project list. And so this was one of the ones that was kind of, I want to say, next on the list. But it was, part of this has been completed with the underpass by Mercuryville. And there is some of those frontage improvements and connections that we're trying to work on that. It's the east side of the highway that were included in that Trip 2030 plan.
And will acknowledge this, our 5-year plan for streets is just coming into existence. The one we had last year was all zeros, and so we're gradually filling in the blanks, but it is, we don't want to just randomly pick things that we want to prioritize, so that's why it's getting a little better, but it's still got some work to do, and we'll continue to work on those items. So those were the two larger projects. The sidewalk, I think everybody knows we've got sidewalk issues throughout the city. We're finding this year, unfortunately, we didn't even get bids on the ADA ramps and 50/50 sidewalks, so neither one of those got done this year. We've been discussing whether 50/50 sidewalk is really the most equitable and most effective way to move sidewalk improvements forward. And what I had suggested as a possibility to consider is creating a sidewalk working group that included engineering and transportation and streets to start looking at some different approaches, whether it's, downtown city blocks or a particular neighborhood or larger areas that we could look at in whole. When we start thinking about that, some of the questions that come up have to do with ownership, because currently the sidewalks are the responsibility of the homeowner or property owner. So something we would definitely want to talk to Dirk about, how we would manage that. We don't want to shovel these sidewalks of the entire city, but meanwhile, a lot of our sidewalks between Main and narrow gauge are not up to the standards we'd like to see. When we add in neighborhoods, and we have areas where unfortunately sometimes our tree roots are growing into somebody else's sidewalk that we're then requiring them to replace. There's some complexity. So I would like to ask leave to proceed with setting that up, and I'd be happy to move that forward. I've talked with Jose conceptually, but obviously the funding is the question, whether that would be a better approach from the council's point of view, or I don't think I've heard ringing cheers for 50/50 since I've been here. So I think it's time to look at something different.
We have a sidewalk inventory that was done last year and the year before, so somewhere in
The
there.
profilograph does gather sidewalk inventory information. I'm not sure, I think Sarah had some information.
Yeah, I think we're trying to combine some efforts, I think, a little bit in the sense of multimodal had some information related to sidewalk condition that they were trying to assess.
Right,
Streets had some, we had some based on our sidewalk. I think we were trying to combine some of those particularly, and we had some, say, initial meetings that were infancy stages of kind of like, what have you guys been doing? What information do you have? We started kind of combining our efforts, and we found that we have a lot of this information in GIS, but we have to kind of figure the right way to mine the information out and then prioritize. And so, again, we had some initial conversations across some different divisions, trying to pull this together, maybe trying to find a different approach moving ahead. Again, really early on in the process.
Well, I know there was a group out there doing that, taking a sidewalk inventory.
Is that something that was going on with Devin?
Devin did 2 years ago, these were.
And that was one of the guys I was talking to, is Devin's like, well, I've got a lot of this information. And we're like, well, Streets has a lot of this information. Like, how do we combine and overlap and make sure that we're kind of looking at the right places?
Well, I think it would be great if we could look at the areas, for example, on 14th Street between Cameron Square that has 64 low-income senior housing units, that many of them are handicapped in some way, shape, or form. And that sidewalk that runs down there, it's cracked, it's about this wide, it's really, really, really bad shape, and the other side of the road doesn't have a sidewalk on it, it's a Smiley building property. So I watch them in their wheelchairs and in their walkers, walking down the middle of 14th Street.
Mm.
And in the wintertime, it's not a very pretty sight because people come around the corner and there's snow all over the road and it's not a good thing. So I think if we could look at where are the areas that are high use by people who need good quality sidewalks and focus on that, I think would be really, that's an example of one kind of thing.
I think that's some of the equity portion of.
Yes.
What's the right place to
Right.
get
Yes.
this people really need it.
And the
Right.
volume of traffic too. It's not just two people, right? So
Right.
that's also.
And schools, the sidewalks to schools
Schools and-
are not necessarily in the best condition.
Well, and that's the Safe Routes to Schools has been working on that too, so
So that was a big, so first of all, let's say
that's
that,
wonderful.
that
I like your idea.
the IAB didn't even
Well,
had no
it's-
questions on college.
It's not
Drive.
brand new, but I think it's time to push it forward.
I like that idea.
So where the IAB left it, just for you guys, is that 100,000 is a placeholder, but maybe coming back from the working group, we might need to look at a big push to address, a really big push to address sidewalks. But they didn't want to direct it at this point, which then leads into the final thing on the transfer.
Right,
That
on the
comes
transfer.
next.
So, the transfer was based on, I think I had said that, 25% from the goals, sorry, the strategic plan. And the guidance that we got last night from IAB was specifically on 8/15/2022. The Infrastructure Advisory Board provided a recommendation to City Council by a 5-0 vote to accept the 2023 CIP plan for 2019 sales tax revenue, with the exception of the interfund transfer to the general fund item in the amount of $843,062. And obviously, that's certainly within their rights, within your rights, that if it is going to change, we will need to go back into staff working with budget and look into where we can find in operating funds. I don't think it could all come out of streets, or we would suffer so in multiple areas that it would be a problem, but
Let me ask for some clarity. So the 843,000 is 25% of the expected revenues of the 2019 sales tax?
for 2023.
And then that is going back into the streets general fund to do maintenance and operations.
It is actually where we started budgeting a couple of years ago. Last year, we did 33% cut.
Right.
This year's 25% cut, and it's
Okay.
supposed to continue.
Right.
25% cut.
To go lower each year.
To go lower each year. Oh, I thought it was 25%. So what, $843,000 is what percentage of
Is 25% of the 1.1.
the 1.1?
Yes.
What's the 1.1?
Maybe
The
other
transfer from 2022.
The
So it's
revenue,
not, it's 25% less than
Oh,
the
yes.
1.1, so it's not
Yes.
25% of it.
Sorry, yes.
But what is it of the revenue of the sales tax? That's,
Yeah, it's not.
because that's what we were talking about. Yes, we were talking about the sales tax revenue, a certain percentage of that would go into the general fund to pay for maintenance and operations.
So we do have an estimate from budget for 2023 to be $7,095,152.
can sales tax alone or with grants?
That's sales tax alone prior to anything.
That seems really high.
So what's 25% of $7 million?
1.77.
So
Yeah, it's 4 million a year.
Yeah, how can,
It's jumped from 4 million, 4.4 million to 7.
I don't think so. So this is a 5-cent sales tax, very similar to Parks and Rec. Unless we're carrying forward, or maybe we're carrying.
Yeah, maybe you're
forward
carrying
monies
forward money.
that we didn't spend.
And
That might include the 3.3.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't count that.
Yeah.
oh, okay.
So the
so
actual
3.3.
estimates
that counties
From
match.
counties
Is what,
matching.
4.7?
Okay, now that
Okay.
makes more sense.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so, but that's still not 25%. 843,000 still is not 25%.
So 1.17.
Yeah.
It's 1.1, 1.2 almost.
Yeah,
So I do want to share with you the conversation, and it was interesting. And as you would expect, the various board members said, well, others that have directed sales tax aren't putting in the same kind of amount into the, basically transferring to the general fund.
Right.
So why are we, the IAB, putting this much in? We have some projects that we think are probably going to come in more expensive than maybe budgeted. That's a comment. And the question of when do we actually, just because it's in there at 25%, maybe the council needs to think about revising that part of the strategic plan. So it was surprising to me. It actually came through with we were both sitting there watching the whole thing as a 5-0 vote in support of keeping that money to demonstrate work. And I think the other conversation was around alleys, because no bids came in for alleys, and that's a $500,000 expenditure typically. So I want to add that flavor.
Can you refer, so if I remember correctly, we talked about how this isn't, solid. We shouldn't be doing interfund transfers, because we wanted to bring that down every year. We didn't want to just take it away all of a sudden because, we had budgeted and planned for this. And so I thought we directed for that 25% decrease from last year to this year in the strategic planning and in the budget meetings last year, if I'm remembering correctly. And so I understand the IAB and knowing those people, like financially, conservative and sound, and which I get, but I feel like council directed staff to do this as like a slow way to not do it anymore, to get to their goal, but to be able to do it effectively and not like yank everything.
The discussion though, it was that not only is it got to go from 800 and something to 0.
no, it doesn't have to go to 0.
Excuse me, it doesn't have, well, just let me finish that thinking.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about it, that number, when the sales tax ends, all right, let me start with that. That was the discussion. When the sales tax ends, if you have, ideally you might want it renewed, but if it's not renewed, then the city will need to cover that cost of maintenance plus the $4 million we've been spending on roads every year, or $4.5 million. So how will the city actually get to the point of having $5 million or plus available to take care of our roads, if that was the discussion?
So I don't actually think that was the way it was thought of, because the 10 years was to bring our roads up to a certain standard, so that we wouldn't be having to bring them up to that standard constantly, and then we were going to maintain them. That's why it was a 10-year plan. Let's get everything fixed so we can maintain it, and then if we build new things. So I don't think the 4 million ongoing was looked at like that when the ballot measure was created.
And I would look to staff, what kind of budget you think you're going to need for streets past.
But there's a difference between maintenance and operations and bringing them, because right now what we said, what I believe what the city council said at the time, was we have deteriorated streets and we need this money to bring them up to snuff. Part of the problem was we deferred maintenance for 8 years. And so that's why they needed the $4 million a year. Hopefully we'll never put ourselves in that position again. That was the goal of this ballot measure.
I have no idea what we'll need.
I do have the specific language that I can dig out if we need to, that I got from Dirk. But it did reference both construction and maintenance.
I was just gonna say that.
Whereas I believe Parks and Recs was
Absolutely.
strictly for capital improvements. So it was
It did
slightly
include-
different.
But to Kim's
Discussion.
question,
Right.
I think it's unreasonable to expect 10 years or 6 years from now, when this ballot, or 8 years from now, when this ends, what, we're not going to need money to be fixing streets and doing things? And where would that money come from if it's not appropriate? I mean, we're going to have to do some things, otherwise we'll have again the repeat of not doing anything.
So
Right.
maybe the re-up is half of what it is now. So because we bring ourselves up to a certain standard and then we're just maintaining that standard. So I don't think we're looking at $5 million every year in perpetuity for that.
One of the things I think is just phenomenal is what we're looking at here is to see 10.5 million street projects for our community. That's amazing for 2023 and much needed.
Well, 6 of that
projects, which
is
is
one.
And that's doable.
Which
You know, we
is
were-
two,
Yes.
but really big projects which are critically important, that junction and stuff. So I'm excited to see this. I'm really excited to see this, and I feel like, I mean, the voters who approved this should be very well aware of, you know, the great work that's going into to fixing our streets. And the 843,000 for the maintenance, you know, I've always myself supported that too. I feel like striping our streets, it's critically important for safety, visibility, to see that kind of work. And in this budget, it's, you know, clearly a small percentage compared to the 10.5 million. But we know that what we were, I'm supportive of what we were trying to do. We were high, we wanted to get it lower, we wanted to get it under control. We're at 25% now, approximately at the 20. And I believe yeah, and I believe we were stopping at 25, right? I don't think we were going lower than that. but
No,
correct
it
me
was
if I'm wrong.
25% reduction from 1.1 to 843.
Yeah.
So that is the reduction.
25%.
And that's great.
25%.
Yeah, it was just gonna
That's, so you're
get down.
reducing it and trying to become more financially sound and taking maintenance on in the general fund. So it won't be all covered under
Right.
this, which is great. And I love that effort, but I support the $843,000 transfer.
Are we still able to get the maintenance that we need done, like the striping of the streets done for visibility and safety? It's key.
Yes, we are doing that. We're in the hiring process and have some challenges there, but anything that we cannot physically accomplish with the number of people we have, we're looking at contracting. So those safety measures do get taken care of, striping, potholes, nobody likes their teeth knocked out, and
Totally.
yeah,
Overlays.
right, the sweeping that we do for environmental sustainability, so that it's not all running down into the river. The clean out that we do of storm sewers and water quality features, snow plowing, all those activities are still being done under our operating budget.
So to your point though, about the money in the general fund and the general fund paying for it. Basically, that's what happened for 8 years prior to the time of this, was the general fund was paying for streets maintenance and it was depleting the reserves, and our reserves were very, very low. So when we come to a re-up or not here, one of the things we might want to think about is the language of the ballot was not clear enough for a lot of people to be certain that construction and actual, the kind of maintenance we're talking about was covered. So I think that that'll be critical when we come up to talking about re-upping it, to make sure that that's incredibly clear.
Points that came up last night was that the many people, or the council, or the advisory board's view was that people expect to see streets done, not to be paying for the staff necessarily. That was one point. The other point, and this comes to the salt path, particularly with Dave overlapping, is consistency between the funds. If you know, one fund is paying a certain percentage toward maintenance, the other funds, you know, who's going to handle the maintenance for all the, you know, like Parks and Rec and things like that. They didn't even go into, I mean, they started deferred maintenance, but we decided that was not something we could even address just yet, our future maintenance. But there was a real question of why is this fund at this level and we're not putting the same kind of amount into maintenance for the other part. Now you can say the streets may have different costs.
Yeah, I think
But
it
there
was
was
the
that
ballot
question.
I was gonna
language.
say the ballot,
Ballot.
so maybe future, if we have a like policy for ballot language going forward, then I would
What has maintenance
also.
in the other ballots?
But I would
too?
also
Yeah,
say,
there's maintenance.
There's maintenance in the other
In the
ballots,
post ballots,
all of
too.
them.
And I haven't seen the other, so I shouldn't speak to them. I can
Go ahead.
only
Go ahead.
speak to
Expenditure.
I would just also say that like sales tax for streets isn't as sexy as a new rec center or Durango Mesa Park, or right. And so being able to fund those things, these beautiful big projects that people love and can get behind, versus this, like sometimes we might have to incorporate a little bit more maintenance into this and realize that this is what we have to do right now. And I'm okay with that personally, like knowing that, like I'm fine knowing that we have to do it for this because streets aren't as great as, not as great, they're actually better, but they're not as easy to get ballots passed. So that makes
Also, I
sense.
totally agree, and also for me, I'm okay with it as well, because if we maintain our streets, it improves the life of the streets, so in the end, it's better. And so we all know that, but it's hard, I think we forget that, and I think that's a key difference, is if we continue to maintain them, we improve the life and ultimately spend less. So. I think
And
it's
I'm
important.
just sharing,
Right.
like Alice and I were sitting.
Right.
So I'm just, I do agree,
Please, yeah.
I do think there's a desire to see some rationale between, you've got 3 directed sales taxes, and there's not a rationale necessarily, explanation.
I don't think there has to be.
I was gonna
Well,
say,
maybe,
I
and
feel
that's,
like we've
I'm
had
just
this
sharing, I'm
conversation.
just sharing.
No,
what
for
I
a
get.
lot of
years.
But I
No,
also
but
know
I'm
those
sharing-
men, or those
I'm
people.
sharing what came out.
And I think we've had that conversation, and as a council, I think we addressed it in our policy of reducing it to this point. So we have brought it down. We should remind them of that, to
Should
where
we
we are
ever?
today. Yes, and we brought it down even from 22 to 23. So we're continuing that decline, and maybe that continues. I don't know.
Or maybe not,
Or
and
maybe
we
not.
want this
Yeah,
to come
yeah.
from here.
We said
And
we
I
bring
think
it
you have
here,
big
which was
projects and big dreams.
perfect
but-
discussion. The other thing I do want to say is there was some talk about alleys, and we
I
had
hope
no
so.
one, well, you want to explain the alley situation? And then
Because
again, for
that's
the
really interesting to me
sidewalks.
to see such a low number. We've had that conversation for a long time.
And the alleys, we have currently surveyed 30 alleys, which is the great majority. And some of them can be maintained fairly well by grading with blade. Some of them have literally half an inch difference from one end to the other in elevation. And so there are significant problems in simply grading to drain, and just paving over it just creates a large puddle. So we've looked at some possibilities with on-site drainage, something called an injection well, which sounds way more complicated. It's basically just a
Driveways, essentially.
right. That's pretty simple, but does require some permitting. We're working on different items. There's some that could be fixed fairly easily. We had some on the list for this year that were under $100,000. So the idea is to do what we can while we're figuring out the best solution. And part of that was tied back to the getting the sewer assessments and the information on if we were going to be in a roadway on either end of an alley, if we raised or lowered for drainage purposes, we might be able to put in storm sewer that would, it's a multiple piece puzzle. And it would be cost prohibitive to go do all of them. So we're trying to prioritize, and sometimes the citizens see different priorities than we do. And I think we're aware of the ones that are repetitive, that are obviously causing more concern for the residents, that we do want to respond to those. So
I think we covered it all.
not a complete answer, but that's one that's in progress, yes.
So on your sheet, your alley, you have estimated at 130/SY. What's SY stand for?
Should be square yard. I'm trying to see
Okay,
what we've got
So
here.
$130 square yard for reconstruction and $120 square yard for repaving. That what I'm, under project details?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking at the presentation.
Not seeing that.
Right, I was like,
Yeah, on your
where's square
project
yards?
information sheet.
And I don't have those with me. So I apologize.
But that's what SY stands for? square
Yes,
yard? Okay,
it is.
that's my question. I didn't know what that, it didn't make any sense. I didn't know what that was.
Right, and we estimate it based on a typical square yard price.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you.
I think we covered
So
most
I
everything
think
there.
that's pretty much, unless there's other specifics that you wanted to ask about, particularly related to 2023, otherwise that
And thank you so much for your answers. And so that made it a lot easier to understand.
And thank you for sending them in advance.
Yes, I appreciated
Saved
that.
everybody
Yeah.
time.
That was helpful, thank you.
This is exciting.
So I think that we got through everything from last night again today. So that was, I do want to thank you guys for, you were staying longer. Both of these two meetings have gone longer, but I think you should know it's a group that takes it very seriously, as many of our boards do, and brings in a lot of technical questions to the front.
It's good to hear, right, so we don't wind up doing groupthink or anything. It really helps to have outside opinions and questions and discussions, so we appreciate it.
Mhm.
And as well as this, yes.
Good, yeah.
Kevin, are you up next, or we finished with everything from Public Works?
Actually, a general one.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Ignoring your projects.
It's okay.
Oh,
This is a
I'm
easy
sorry.
slide.
okay, yes.
It's a small slide.
So would you like to talk through those?
Yeah,
I can't speak to the library stuff.
No.
Yeah, but that's in our current budget. So
Yes.
now
Right.
we're in 2023.
They're all zero at the library.
I'll go to the bottom first, maybe with the storm drainage master plan, anticipate completing phase 3 this year. The extra 10,000 is kind of what's left from our original contract amount of 80,000. We had a space for change orders. So we do anticipate finishing, but we have the 10,000 extra just in case we have change orders. And that's similar for the Grandview Access Control Plan. We've already paid our share to CDOT, which was about $16,000, but we have the 4,000 for change orders or each scope that we need to evaluate there. Still anticipating we try and get the majority of that work done this year. I think the one thing we got back from our consultant on that was they felt it was really important to have some political backing in the sense of trying to implement that access control plan, and they wanted to have the presentation with the joint city council and board of county commissioners to do presentations to both bodies, just in terms of timing, and those agendas add up quickly. That one slid a little bit. We're trying to get back on the last agenda. It was just too full. So that was one of the things the consultant really pushed CDOT and us to go for before we reached out to the public to start educating the public on what this access control plan might mean for the properties fronting those major roads. So that one's probably a little bit further behind, but again, looking for next year, just some money that was in our original contract amount, just in case we have change orders. The top one, 32nd Street. That one I'm pushing until next year again. I've asked for another extension on our DOLA grant. I submitted the dam safety, have some extra to-dos from the dam safety. So that's where we've added that in as a reappropriation for 2023. And then the stormwater CIP design, number one, I was a little hesitant to put in a placeholder, so to speak, but we've been working on that stormwater master plan for years and have not done a design of a stormwater CIP. And we're eager to do it. We're going to put it in the budget and say we're moving ahead on our first design. And that relates back to the stormwater master plan, identifying and prioritizing what is that first project we want to start.
So Keith, on the 32nd Street, are you saying that is that 527,000 isn't going to happen this year?
No, we won't spend the 527.
So that's so it's rolling over. Into the-
Right, and I think what finance had done is they've taken our budget amount from last year and subtracted out the DOLA grant money from that, so that's where that 527 came from, but that's not actually what we're going to spend this year.
So actually would be rolling over, council would be reappropriating it. I have a question for you.
Sure.
Yeah. As you come into town from 550, there's that stormwater pond right there. It's the first thing you see as you're coming into town. And I've been in places where people have actually kept the pond underneath and put something over. Is that something that you're looking at from a design? I mean, when you talk about not just having these open bodies of water throughout town, is there something that could be done with that section? That would,
On the CFI?
I think.
Are you talking about the 30-second project or?
No, not the 32nd project, or maybe it's all
I
CDOT.
think it's
CDOT.
Yeah, coming in on.
Yeah.
It's that stormwater, right
Yeah,
there, so that's all CDOT. So it would require a negotiation with them to do something.
Yes.
And I understand they have a significant amount of money these days. Okay, so I'm just curious how, who would be actually saying, hey, is there anything you could be doing with that? So we're not looking at a pool of water as you come into town.
Yeah, well, so that there's definitely a CDOT facility. These streets actually maintains one of those through an IGA. And there's kind of 4 ponds in that vicinity that we actually maintain. The one on that, I guess I'd say northeast corner, is definitely the biggest and most noticeable. So if we're looking at doing something there, that's something that we can initiate. I can talk to the streets and we can together go to CDOT and say, hey, we've had this feedback. Is there anything we can do, and what would that process look like? Because for the most part, I think CDOT would say it's doing its job. You know,
It's an eyesore as you come
Well,
into
do
town.
we have any interest in upgrading that? CDOT may be less likely to do something that's to make it more attractive to people visiting, but I think we're always open to we receive this feedback.
Well, the problem is too, though, is it has a lot of contaminants.
Right.
Because it gets all the stuff from the road when they plow it, it gets the stuff from the railroad, it gets, so
Does.
planting things that live in it.
We wouldn't-
I was looking at that the other day and I'm thinking, oh, this would be a.
We most likely wouldn't be able to put much in the bottom. There'd probably be more screening and stuff around the edge
Yeah.
to potentially try and hide what's in that. Or, you know, some of those regional facilities, they do try in terms of like benches or walls or other things that aren't plants that will die because of the contaminants that are being treated. But
And
we
we
can
do
certainly
have to
take that.
dig it out periodically, so it's.
Right. Maintenance is we remove that sediment.
I just raise it because it's your approach to town, your approach to downtown. And I figured it was CDOT, but I figured there has to be some negotiation or discussion about, you know, what's your responsibility to this community when you have an eyesore as the first thing you're driving into town about.
We can certainly have a conversation.
Put it on the list and talk to them about it.
There's a few other people, I'm not directing staff, this would go to Jose,
Right.
but thank you.
Yeah, I think that was the short list, so unless there's any other specific questions out there.
Well, paying for stormwater management eventually will need to be thought of. We've discussed it at IAB, we still don't have a plan.
That's been discussed for years. We
Right,
know it's
we
gonna be a
did
big
discuss-
ticket.
We did discuss it here.
Yep, we're here recently talking about funding mechanisms.
Yeah.
Jenny is still working on that with consultant. So that phase 3.
Kind of like a comprehensive overarching plan would be helpful because so many of these things come up, like we saw water, we know stormwater drains, potentially housing, potentially streets. I mean, how does it all fitting together
Right.
for our community?
And I think once we have the prioritized master plan for the stormwater, we'll have all the blocks to put together and say, hey, okay, how does this go before, after, with, and then start coordinating it. And obviously, getting our street paving last so that things are long-lasting, durable surfaces and not cut up bits and pieces.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Kevin, I think you have one.
Anything?
Anything else?
Oh,
Christine?
done?
I think we have one more that Kevin needs to.
And Justin.
Question. We can be pretty quick on that. I don't know if you have it, you're on the sheet, but it's the common thread project.
Yes, I saw it.
So Tommy can certainly speak to this with a little more depth, but we've bid it out a couple, Tommy.
Hold on 1 second. Before you,
Melissa just looked at me and said, just do it. I said, we're trying.
before you start talking,
Tommy?
just for the microphone, can you introduce yourself so folks listening can recognize your voices?
Tommy Crosby, Economic Opportunity Coordinator.
Kevin Hall, Managing Director, Community Development. So what I was saying is we've had the art piece has been built for years. It's a very collaborative community project, as you might recall. Find there a little bit in terms of the number of pieces. We haven't been able to get it installed because it's in the CDOT right of way, and did it twice, I believe, 3 times, and we haven't had any luck. We either come up short on budget or there was no bids at all. So we want to take one more shot at it. And if it doesn't come together, we have to, the CEC said we'll look at other alternatives for placing our, maybe in the Greenway at the river corridor or some other locations. So we thought we would put it in as a CIP for 2020.
And so you're intending to try again on the 550 corridor? And then if that doesn't work, you might like look at the Santa Rita Administration Building as another option or something like that. Is that okay?
Correct. If I'm not mistaken, our
What
artist as well as
What was the original budget for it? For the
It was
installation?
between $40,000 and $45,000, and we've reached out to local and regional contractors. They've said that for a project that involves a CDOT traffic control plan, it's an odd size project. The CDOT traffic control plan calls for a little bit larger of a budget, even though it's not a super extensive, complicated project. But that CDOT traffic control plan, we heard time and time again, required a little bit of an effort to bump that budget up to $75,000.
So would it make sense to combine that with figuring out what to put at the corner where the dinosaur was?
That's
exactly what I just asked.
And because then we're paying for the same traffic control.
It's a good question. The art piece itself is 28-foot steel panels, so
Yeah.
I don't mean,
It wouldn't
I don't
fit.
mean putting that one in there. I mean, coming up with something to replace what the Arc of History was.
absolutely. I think if we found a sculpture to replace Arc of History, we could do those at the same time.
Right.
But yeah, common threads won't necessarily fit in that specific concrete base.
Well,
where
that
the-
wasn't my intention. No, my intention was that
do it
we
once.
emphasize finding something to put there also, so we take advantage of the money that we're spending on traffic control in order to get that
Absolutely.
installed too.
Yeah.
How do you think the group feels about that?
Well, I don't know without asking them, but I'm sure that they wouldn't mind that. I think that right now they're just so focused, like, get it in, if that makes sense. But we could see if it, timing wise, if it worked to find, like, commission the artist to do it, and I just don't know the timing of it all.
Yeah, I just
and how
hate to
it
see
would-
to have to pay traffic control again.
Yeah.
in order to install it.
And money, I don't know how much we have left, like if we have, we'll use larger tax money for that, or there's other budget in that we could use for the installation of the other.
Yeah, I think we're exploring the idea of with intentionally trying to activate certain spaces, putting out specific calls to artists, kind of wedging away lodgers, tax, arts, and culture funds for specific areas. So I think we could definitely put out a call to artists for replacing the Arc of History. We already have the concrete base, so it would really just be purchasing the piece, likely doing that through a public call, just to provide the opportunity for anyone who's interested in placing something in that space.
So the question I would have then is, if you actually were gonna do 2 common threads and something there, as a budget process, would you prefer to come to us with a request for 2 pieces of installation, or come back at some point if you found someone to then ask for an adjustment? You know, you have your 2 choices.
Well, this number probably won't suffice. for
No,
both,
it won't
because it's gonna be
suffice for
several
both.
more days of traffic control, but the mobilization of traffic control gets expensive right out of the gates. To Councilor Baxter's point, do it once and then say it would be a cost savings there.
I would say though that we would want this here no matter what, even if we
Yeah.
didn't get it, if that makes, to your point, like, this is there, and then we can come back with an adjustment or something if we find.
That's-
Or you come in with a second request.
That's what I'm thinking.
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely. And I think reserving the 75K for specifically common threads to be able to start conversations with contractors, get another RFP out just to get that lined up. It seems like based on some of the sculpture installs we've done around town, they're really quite fast. So I think if we utilize the first round of lodgers tax funding in 2023 with the January 31st deadline, we could likely have a piece purchased, have a sculpture lined up to install and then when the common threads install takes place, we could tack that on per se. I don't necessarily think it would require a alteration of the CIP submission. I think we could utilize that first lodgers tax arts and culture date with the time we have still remaining in the year to put together that call to artists. Yeah, I think we'd be in a good place to do
That
that.
makes sense, and
Yeah.
I'm assuming that there would probably be support, but we can talk about it.
Yeah, at least
It does.
explore the idea.
Yeah.
Anytime we can save money, it's great.
Great. Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, folks.
Is that it?
No,
IT.
Oh, I see, sorry. My apologies.
Problem.
Server, okay.
That's right.
Oh, not a cheat.
Mayor, councilors, I'm Justin Carlton, IT Director. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
So we're looking to replace our server infrastructure. These devices, they're called blades. They host over 100 virtual machines. Anything from our financial systems to some of our public safety systems to our file servers run on this bank of servers. And the current set that we're on now, basically they go end of support, end of life in 2024, early 2024. So the goal is to get off of obsolete hardware and onto supported new hardware before we go into life. And that's the purpose of this project.
Sounds good.
My biggest question is, do you anticipate other things? Like, do you feel like that's enough for what you need to be doing?
We do have some other capital projects kind of projected out for 2024 and on, but since the technology replacement fund is so new, we're kind of bringing those in per year and then figuring out how the appropriations are going to look moving forward so that it becomes a self-sustained type of deal. These servers that we're replacing, we did some analysis. We had some third-party companies come in and analyze our requirement, and they're slated to last at least 5 years. These servers plug into a bigger chassis. That bigger chassis is not slated to be end of life, but it hasn't been posted yet, but we're told that that's going to need to be replaced in 5 years as well. So we're kind of developing this fund as we have the projects roll into it. If that makes sense.
And then my other question was on security. Issues like that would not come out as a CIP project, but you have sufficient funding to handle security issues?
Security we have baked into our operational budget. We have both audit funds and remediation funds. And basically every year, our goal is every year to do a security audit and then security remediations on top of that.
Justin, thank you.
Thank you.
That is all.
And that is all. Council, thank you.
Are you sure?
Are we off?
I mean, that would be ideal, right?
Well done.
Feels like. I feel like I remember talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I needed to get calls. I remember what.